Okay, so like resisting excess.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like everywhere we turn, there's some temptation.
Yeah.
But imagine if instead of just like giving in, we actually had tools to thrive in this world.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about today, the power of temperance. Not just like avoiding stuff, but really how it unlocks a richer life.
It's really interesting, the material you sent over.
Yeah.
Just the sheer breadth of it. You've got ancient philosophy, and then neuroscience, and then economic data, and then even personal stories.
Wild.
Yeah, so it really shows you how this challenge of excess is not new at all. It's like woven into the human experience.
Totally. Yeah, and we're going deep today. We're going to look at like the actual cost of excess, how our brains are literally wired, and even some surprising connections to like the opioid crisis.
The key really is in the material that you sent is understanding those forces that are pushing us towards excess.
Yeah.
Both the internal ones inside of ourselves and the external pressures from society. Once we see those clearly, then we can start to build up some resistance.
Okay, I'm so excited to unpack all this with you.
Yeah.
Let's get into like the nitty-gritty, the science of excess.
Okay.
We all know indulging feels good.
Right.
What's actually happening in our brain?
So it boils down to dopamine.
Okay.
Dopamine is that neurotransmitter. It's our brain's reward system. And it fires off when we do things that are pleasurable or even necessary for survival, like eating.
It's like a signal like, do that again, that was good.
Precisely. It's like, yes, that was good. Do that again. The problem is that this system it's designed to keep us alive can be hijacked. Addictive behaviors and substances flood our brains with dopamine.
Wow.
It creates an artificial high. And the more we chase that high, the less sensitive our brains become, leading to that cycle of craving and needing more and more.
So this is where it gets really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because it's not just like drugs or alcohol.
Absolutely not.
Right.
This applies to social media, video games, work.
Oh, wow.
Anything that can trigger those dopamine pathways can lead to that same cycle of craving and excess.
It's like the modern world is built to hijack us.
It really is a way.
Think about it. How many times have you found yourself just endlessly scrolling on your phone?
Oh my.
Even when you know you should be doing something else.
So many.
Yeah, right. Everyone listening, I bet, is nodding their head right now.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for us practically?
Practically, it means understanding how our brains work is the first step.
Okay.
Once we know the rules of the game, we can start to change our strategy.
So knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
Right. But it's not just our individual brains that are at play here.
Right.
Next up, I want to talk about like the economics of temperance.
Okay.
This might surprise you.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting in the sources you sent was the hidden costs of excess.
Right.
For individuals and for society as a whole. They point out how industries from fast food to fashion actually depend on us over consuming. They push this idea that more is always better.
And that mindset comes with a big price tag.
Yeah.
One of the sources cites a stat that the opioid crisis
Yeah.
in the U.S. cost an estimated $3 billion annual in the 2010s, primarily from healthcare costs, lost productivity, and treatment. It's a staggering amount.
It really is. And that's just one example.
Right.
The sources also talk about the concept of externalities.
Oh, yeah.
Those hidden costs that are borne by others, not just the individual.
Yeah.
So, for example, healthcare costs associated with secondhand smoke or environmental costs of all the plastic that we dispose of.
Yeah.
Our choices, they have a ripple effect,
Yeah.
impacting others and the world around us.
Makes you think twice about that impulse buy or that extra serving,
Yeah, it does.
doesn't it?
It really does.
It forces us to ask, like, how do we balance what we want in the moment with our responsibility to like the bigger picture,
Right.
to our communities and to the planet?
Absolutely, because ultimately our choices shape the kind of world that we're creating.
That is some deep stuff.
It is.
Okay, let's take a step back in time now
Okay.
and look at the historical perspective on temperance.
I think what's fascinating is how the meaning of temperance has shifted over time.
Yeah.
You know, in the past, it was often tied to specific movements like the Prohibition era in the U.S.
Right.
The sources really paint a vivid picture of that time.
Oh, yeah.
The speakeasies, the social upheaval, and the unexpected consequences of trying to legislate morality.
When I hear about speakeasies, I can't help but picture flapper dresses and secret passwords.
Oh, yeah.
It's so fascinating, that time period.
Right. But what's important is what the sources emphasize is that temperance today isn't just about alcohol.
Right.
It's a much broader idea,
Okay.
encompassing things like digital detoxes, mindful consumption, and finding balance in every area of life.
So it's not about deprivation, it's about being intentional
Yes.
with our choices.
You got it.
I love that. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the power of moderation.
Okay.
This is where ancient wisdom meets modern science.
Right. Absolutely. The sources draw upon examples from ancient philosophy, like Aristotle's concept of the golden mean,
Right.
this idea that virtue lies in finding the balance between two extremes. And what's remarkable is that modern science is actually backing this up.
Really? You have an example?
Yeah. So one of the sources points to research on alcohol consumption.
Okay.
And it shows that moderate drinking, around 1 drink per day, is actually linked to a lower risk of heart disease.
Wow.
Compared to both heavy drinkers and those who abstain completely.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's that U-shaped curve. Too much is harmful,
Right.
but so is too little.
So moderation really is the sweet spot.
It really seems to be.
So moderation isn't just about avoiding the negative.
Right.
It's about optimizing for the positive.
I think that's a great way to put it.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. We've got the science of excess, the economic angle, the historical context, and now this power of moderation. But how does this all play out in the real world? Let's look at temperance in business.
You know what's fascinating to me is that more and more businesses are recognizing this power of less is more.
Right.
And they're building that into their brands.
The sources give some really good examples.
Yeah.
Companies like Patagonia, with their focus on minimalism and sustainability, and then Peloton,
Yep.
promoting balanced exercise. It's like they're tapping into a shift.
Absolutely.
What consumers want.
I think they are. These companies, they're attracting customers who value quality over quantity,
Right.
experiences over just accumulating stuff. And that's translating into loyal customer bases and strong reputation.
So it's not just a personal virtue.
No.
Temperance can actually be a smart business strategy.
I think it can.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that sustainability in all its forms
Yeah.
is ultimately good for business.
This is blowing my mind.
It's interesting stuff.
Okay, I want to dive into something that's really personally important to me.
Yeah.
The connection between temperance and mental health.
Okay.
I know from my own experience how easily excess can lead to stress, anxiety, even burnout.
Right. And the sources highlight this really clear link between excess and mental health challenges.
Right.
But they also emphasize how temperance can be a powerful tool for building mental resilience,
Okay.
especially in high-stress professions.
One source shares a really powerful story of John,
Yeah.
a former Navy SEAL,
Yeah.
who relied on principles of temperance
Yeah.
to get through incredibly grueling training.
And John's experience shows how self-controlled discipline and balance, all core components of temperance,
Right.
can help us navigate even the most demanding situations.
It's about managing emotions, setting boundaries, prioritizing well-being.
Yes.
And those skills are valuable for everyone,
For sure.
not just Navy SEALs.
Not just Navy SEALs.
Right. Okay. I'm so glad we're talking about this because it's so important. Okay, let's move on to our final stop for this part of our deep dive, digital temperance.
Okay.
And let's be honest, this is where things get really, really tricky.
It does raise that crucial question. How do we navigate a world where technology is practically designed to keep us hooked?
Yeah.
You know, social media platforms, for example, are engineered to trigger those dopamine pathways we were talking about earlier,
Right.
making it harder than ever to resist the pull of the virtual world.
It's like we're bombarded
We are.
with notification updates, this constant fear of missing out.
The fear of missing out is huge.
And it can lead to a sense of overwhelming anxiety, even addiction. One source tells a pretty jarring story about Jake,
Oh, yeah.
a high school teacher whose social media use almost cost him his job.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that digital temperance,
Yeah.
it's not just about productivity, it's about protecting our mental health,
Right.
our relationships.
Absolutely.
So what can we do?
Well, the sources suggest some practical strategies
Yeah.
for managing our screen time, setting boundaries, and resisting the allure of the virtual world.
It's about taking back control of our attention, our time,
Yes.
using technology as a tool
Right.
instead of letting it use us.
Exactly.
This has been an incredible journey so far.
It has. The range of sources you brought together for this deep dive is remarkable.
I feel exhausted, but in a good way.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, from the science of excess to the economics of temperance, how it shows up in business and our mental health.
Right.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
I know.
There's so much more to explore.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back in part 2, we'll continue our deep dive into this fascinating world of temperance.
Stay tuned, folks. The best is yet to come.
Welcome back. I'm so ready to keep exploring this idea of temperance. In this part, I thought we could shift focus a bit and look at how temperance intersects with religion.
Okay.
It's kind of tricky, right? Because you often think of religion being about strict rules.
It's a common misconception.
Yeah. What's interesting is that so many religious traditions actually emphasize moderation and balance as core virtue. One of them even talks about the Buddhist principle of the middle way,
Right.
which is all about avoiding extremes.
Exact. And it's not just Buddhism. The materials touch on how Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, even Native American spiritual practices all have this concept of temperance woven into their teaching.
So it's not about deprivation,
Yeah.
but finding that harmonious middle ground.
Precisely. The idea being that excess can actually hinder our spiritual growth,
Wow.
while a balanced approach allows us to live in greater harmony with ourselves and the world around us.
I love that.
Yeah.
It suggests that this desire for balance isn't just some arbitrary rule,
Yeah.
but something deeper, maybe even part of human nature itself.
I think that's a great point. It seems to transcend specific doctrines or beliefs.
Okay, let's shift gears again and look at something a bit more concrete.
Yeah.
The role of temperance in government regulation.
Okay.
This is where things can get a little controversial, don't you think?
Absolutely. The sources you've selected delve into both historical and modern approaches to regulating industries that often contribute to excess,
Right.
like alcohol, gambling, and tobacco.
Right.
They highlight both the successes and the challenges of trying to influence behavior through policy.
One of them even takes us back to the Prohibition era in the U.S.
Yeah.
with those vivid descriptions of speakeasies, bootleggers,
Right.
and the unintended consequences of trying to enforce morality.
Prohibition is a classic example of how even well-intentioned policies can sometimes backfire.
Yeah.
And the sources analyze why this particular experiment ultimately failed,
Right.
leading to the repeal of the 18th Amendment.
It really makes you wonder, where's that line between individual freedom
Right.
and government intervention when it comes to these issues of excess?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And the sources don't pretend to have easy answers.
Right.
But they do raise some important considerations about the role of government in protecting public health, encouraging responsible behavior, and addressing the economic costs that come with excessive consumption.
It's a delicate balancing act for sure.
It is.
All right, let's bring things into the 21st century and talk about the unique challenges of temperance in the digital age.
Okay.
This is where things get really interesting for me.
This is where the sources get really specific, digging into both the psychological and technological factors that make resisting excess so difficult in our world of instant gratification and constant stimulation.
One even talks about the attention economy,
Yeah.
where our attention itself is the most valuable commodity, and companies are battling for every second of our time.
Yeah.
It's a bit unsettling when you stop and think about it.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it? We
Yeah.
have more access to information and entertainment than ever before,
Right.
yet we also feel more distracted and overwhelmed than ever.
It's like we're drowning in information, but still constantly thirsty for more.
Precisely. The good news is that the sources don't just point out the problem. They also offer some really practical strategies for managing our digital consumption, setting boundaries, and reclaiming our attention.
One even suggests using technology to fight technology.
Oh, yeah.
Like setting screen time limits or using apps that block distracting websites.
It all comes back to recognizing that technology is a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. The choice is ultimately ours.
Right. We have to be the ones in control. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our discussion, I want to touch on one more crucial aspect of temperance: its role in our social interaction. How do our relationships with others influence our ability to resist excess?
You know, this is where the sources really shine, weaving together personal stories, sociological research, and even historical examples to show how much our social environment shapes our choices.
One even talks about the concept of social contagion.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that our behaviors are influenced by the people we surround ourselves with,
Right.
especially those we admire or identify with.
Exactly. And this can work both ways. If we surround ourselves with people who value moderation and balance,
Right.
we're more likely to adopt those same values. But if our social circles encourage excess, it can be much harder to resist.
It reminds me of that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
That's a good one.
So we have our individual willpower, the influences of our social circle, and then, of course, the broader cultural norms at play.
Yeah, the sources go deep on this, highlighting how cultural values and beliefs about excess can have a profound impact on our choices.
They even explore how advertising, marketing, and the media often glorify excess,
They do.
making it even harder to resist.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us that we need more.
Yeah.
That we're not enough as we are.
It can be a real struggle to tune out that noise.
It can, but the sources offer hope.
Okay, good.
They emphasize that we have the power to challenge these cultural norms, to make conscious choices, and to create a world where temperance is valued and celebrated.
That's a powerful thought. We've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We have.
Exploring the role of religion,
Yeah.
government regulation, technology, and social interactions in shaping our relationship with temperance.
It's been a fascinating journey, and we've seen how this concept of temperance is both timeless and incredibly relevant to our lives today.
I'm feeling inspired. But we're not done yet. When we come back in part 3, we'll get even more practical, diving into specific strategies for cultivating temperance in our own lives.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we've explored like the what and the why of temperance.
Right.
Now for the part I'm most excited about. The how. Let's get practical. What can we actually do to resist excess in our daily lives?
Well, the sources that you've gathered, they offer a whole toolkit of strategy.
Okay.
But one of the most fundamental and
Yeah.
perhaps most overlooked is self-awareness.
Oh, interesting. One source even suggested keeping a journal to track your behaviors and pinpoint the moments when you're most susceptible to excess. It's like becoming a detective of your own habits.
Exactly. Once we understand our trigger, we can start developing strategies to navigate them.
Okay.
Maybe it's avoiding certain environments, setting firm boundaries, or even finding new coping mechanisms for stress or boredom.
So knowledge is power, but self-knowledge is the real key.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
We can't overcome an enemy we don't fully understand.
Right.
And in this case, the enemy is often ourselves.
Okay, self-awareness is step one.
Yeah.
What else do we need in our temperance toolkit?
One of the most powerful tools, according to the sources, is the power of no.
Ooh, no.
In a world that constantly tells us to want more, do more, be more,
Right.
learning to say no can be a radical act of self-preservation.
You know, it's funny you mention that.
Yeah.
Because one of the sources talks about how saying no can be especially difficult in a culture that glorifies busyness and productivity.
Oh, it is.
It's like we're afraid to seem lazy or disappoint others if we don't say yes to everything.
It's a valid concern,
Right.
but what the sources emphasize is that saying no is not selfish.
Yeah.
It's actually an act of self-respect.
Okay.
It's about protecting our time, our energy, and our well-being.
So it all goes back to setting those healthy boundaries.
Precisely. It's a skill that takes practice,
Yeah.
but it's essential for cultivating true temperance.
Okay. Self-awareness, the power of no. What else have we got?
Another strategy that comes up repeatedly is finding healthy alternatives.
Okay.
This could mean finding new activities to replace those that trigger excess,
Right.
or discovering healthier ways to cope with stress or boredom.
So like if you're trying to cut back on sugar,
Yeah.
you might swap that afternoon soda for sparkling water and some fruit.
Exactly. Or if you find yourself mindlessly scrolling through social media when you're feeling stressed,
Right.
maybe try going for a walk, meditating, or calling a friend instead.
It's about being proactive and finding those outlets for our energy and emotions that actually nourish us
Yes.
rather than depleting us.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about being creative and experimenting to find what truly works for you.
You know, this is making me realize that temperance isn't just about restriction.
Yeah.
It's about substitution. It's about replacing those unhealthy patterns with something better.
That's a brilliant insight. It's about finding joy and satisfaction in things that align with our values and contribute to our well-being.
Okay, I'm feeling motivated, but let's be real. Resisting excess is a journey, not a destination. There will be times when we slip up,
Right.
when we give in to temptation. What do we do when that happens?
That's where self-compassion comes in. And the
Self-compassion.
sources really emphasize that beating ourselves up over slip-ups
Right.
is counterproductive.
Yeah, we just feel worse.
It makes it more likely that we'll just give up altogether.
Right.
So we need to be kind to ourselves even when we mess up.
Even when we mess up.
Absolutely. We're all human.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes. It's about recognizing that we're works in progress and using those slip-ups as opportunities to learn and grow.
Okay.
We can ask ourselves, what triggered this behavior? How can I approach this differently next time?
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. Every day is a fresh start.
I love that. Before we wrap up, I have one final question.
Okay.
What's one small step listeners can take today to start cultivating more temperance in their own lives?
I would say pick one area where you feel excess is holding you back and set a small, achievable goal. Maybe it's limiting your screen time for just 1 hour each day,
Okay.
cutting back on sugar, or saying no to one unnecessary commitment.
Right.
The key is to start small and be consistent.
It's about taking that first step
Yes,
and then building momentum from there.
absolutely.
This has been such an insightful deep dive
It has.
into the power of temperance. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what it means and how to apply it to my own life.
It's been a pleasure exploring these sources with you. It's fascinating to see how this age-old virtue is being reinterpreted and embraced in our modern world.
To recap, we've talked about the importance of self-awareness, the power of saying no, finding healthy alternatives, being kind to ourselves, and starting small. Simple principles, but not always easy to put into practice.
No, they're not. But as we've seen from the sources, embracing temperance is not about deprivation.
Yeah.
It's about liberation.
I love that.
It's about freeing ourselves from the grip of excess so we can live with more intention, balance, and authenticity.
What an inspiring way to end our conversation.
I think so.
For those of you who are ready to dive even deeper into the world of temperance, we highly recommend checking out the book that inspired this deep dive. It's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books and is packed with even more insights, strategies, and real-life stories. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking that beautiful balance in all that you do.